And I'll just share, welcome. Just going to share my screen. Can everybody see that okay? Great. So, hello and welcome to our little presentation today. And thank you for being here. I do know that attending something about grief can take energy and courage. And I just really appreciate that you guys chose this time with me. My hope is today is not to give you answers to every question grief brings. Instead, I hope to offer a gentle introduction to understanding and grief to help normalize some experiences you may be having, or people close to you, or your staff, and to remind you that grief does not need to be carried alone. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lynn Muir, and I'm the owner-operator of lynnmuirgrief.ca. Before becoming a grief educator, grief became part of my own life in ways that changed me deeply. In 2010, my brother, Scott, my only sibling, died unexpectedly. Then my father died suddenly in 2017, and 4 months later, my mother died after a very long illness. Recently, I experienced the death of my beloved cat, RP, short for Rolo Polo. He was 19 years old when he died, and he was my soul animal. Each of these losses shaped me differently. Grief changed how I understand life, relationships, identity, and what it means to be supported. After 35-year career as a registered nurse and healthcare leader, I chose to retire and begin this work. I felt called to do something that could support people living with the death of a person they love or a beloved companion animal, to become the kind of support I did not receive after my own losses, and to create meaning from those losses I have lived through. Today's session is grounded both in professional experience and my own lived experience, and I'm grateful to share this time with you. I'd also like to recognize Dr. Gwen Cleveland, who supported the content development for today's session. Gwen has been a registered nurse for almost 50 years. It's crazy. And has worked across many settings, including bereavement care, and different roles throughout her career. Gwen and I have worked together on many projects over the last 10 years, and I have the pleasure of collaborating with her in my new grief support practice. So thank you, Gwen. Gwen is also going to assist today as our chat monitor, and will help me keep track of questions and reflections shared throughout the presentation. So before we begin, I'd like to invite us to take a brief moment of silence. Wherever you are today, I invite you to gently connect with the person or the companion animal you are missing and send them love. Thank you. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. Just to remind you that this is education and support. It's not therapy or counseling. Please take care of yourself during our time together. Cameras are optional. Feel free to step away, stretch, grab a water, and return when you need. If at any point you feel emotionally overwhelmed or in crisis, please reach out to local crisis support. And in Canada, that is 988. Thank you for helping create a respectful and confidential space. Our agenda today is going to be a conversation about what grief is, common myths, how grief shows up, what can help, and a few gentle takeaways. There will also be time at the end for questions, but if you're like me and a question pops in your head, feel free to put it in the chat box just so you don't forget. And, Gwen will make sure that we address them at the end of our presentation. So I'll just read our land acknowledgement. As you know and may be aware of, that June 21st was National Indigenous People Day. And as part of our ongoing work on truth and reconciliation, I would like to read the land acknowledgement. The work takes place on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who have cared for this land since time immemorial. These lands include what is now known as Brampton, where I am located, and Halton Hills, where I provide services, and are part of the Adjutant's Purchase, which is Treaty 19, and the head of the Lake Purchase, which is Treaty 14 and Treaty 14A. With gratitude, we honor their enduring relationship with the land, water, and all living beings. The ground beneath us holds many stories of life, loss, resilience, and renewal. In this space where we gather in honor of grief and remembering those we love, may we also pause to acknowledge the land that holds us. May we walk gently here with respect to the people who have cared for the land for generations and with care for the community we share today. For those interested in deepening their understanding of Indigenous bonds, where they live and work, you can explore Native Land Digital at nativeland.ca. A very helpful interactive resource that helps people learn about the traditional territories, treaties, and languages connected to the land around them. In grief work, I often think about both the land and the people, how they hold memory. So thank you for taking this moment with me. This slide introduces language that people often hear, but may use interchangeably. So loss is what happened to you, what's happened. It's the state of feeling of grief when deprived of someone or something of value. Bereavement refers to a period after the loss. It's an adjective, bereaved, which is derived, and I find this so interesting, the background about this, from the verb bereave, which in turn comes from an Old English term, bereavfian, meaning to deprive of, take away, seize, or rob. Grief is what happens inside us, the thoughts, the emotions, the reactions, and mourning is how we express that outwardly. So in many cultures, sometimes you see it now, but definitely, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, you used to see people wearing black. And that was telling people that they had lost somebody important to them and that we would treat them differently. Or you might have seen people draping their house in black or a wreath. And it really was just saying, that house or those people have had a loss. One of the reasons grief feels confusing is because these parts move differently. So, why talk about grief? Grief touches every life, yet most of us are never really taught how to grieve. Some say we're a grief illiterate society. People often ask, am I doing this right? Why am I still feeling this? Why doesn't anyone understand? These questions are incredibly common. Grief isn't a problem to solve, though. It's an experience we move through. What is grief? Well, grief is much bigger than sadness. It affects emotions, thoughts, physical health, relationship, identity, and meaning. I also want to acknowledge that grief includes the loss of a person, loss of a beloved companion animal, and anticipatory grief before the death occurs. All are valid. Not all grief receives the same recognition, though, and that does matter. It does make a difference. Maybe these common myths about grief. You might hear, time, this one's very common. Time heals all wounds. In reality, time changes grief, but connection and support help. You should be over it. You often see people sort of judging grief and saying, oh, Lynn, she should really be over it by now. But grief doesn't have a timeline. You hear this too, and particularly in general gender roles. Strong people don't cry. The reality is that strength includes feelings. If I move forward, if I let go of my grief, if I move forward, that means I'm forgetting. And that's not true. We don't stop loving. So just take a moment if you want. You can do this silently and just maybe notice, or if you want, you can put some in the chat about some of the myths that you may have heard. Or sayings, when somebody dies. How grief shows up. Many people think grief is emotional, but grief is also physical. You may notice difficulty concentrating, exhaustion, disruption in sleep, appetite changes, questioning meaning, changes in relationships. Sometimes people think something's wrong with them. Often, these are normal grief responses. In recent years, researchers have helped us better understand that grief is not only emotional, it affects our brains and our bodies as well. One researcher whose work I deeply appreciate is Mary Frances O'Connor. She's a researcher out of the UK, and she's the author of The Grieving Brain. Her work explores how our brains adapt after loss and helps explain experiences many grieving people describe: difficulty concentrating, memory changes, exhaustion, feeling distracted, or even moments of expecting the person or companion animal to still be there. Understanding this can be incredibly validating because it reminds us that grief is not weakness, and many of these responses are understandable, often after a profound loss. This is an area I'm especially interested in, and I'll be offering future webinars that explore these topics more deeply. And Gwen and I have been talking about doing a webinar and maybe a full workshop on this because there's so much information to take in, but related to grieving of the brain and grieving of the body. We look at what current research tells us and what practical supports can help us move through grief. Understanding how grief shows up can help us respond with more compassion towards ourselves and others. Many people grieve. Their grief also shows up at work. People sometimes notice that they have more difficulty with concentrating on what's happening in a meeting, making decisions, remembering details, managing competing priorities, tolerating stress and noise. And this will, help leaders understand that you may have to make those sort of little a accommodations, maybe stretch out the timelines or give smaller amounts of work or allow for more rest periods or shorter days. These things help people sort of get back into their work. Tasks that once felt routine may suddenly feel exhausting. But others, and I've seen this many, many times, other people throw themselves into work as a way to cope, and that's okay too, while others simply find getting through the day takes enormous energy. None of this means that you're failing. It may be grief showing up in your life in a way you didn't expect. So grief is not linear. You don't like the death, you grieve, and then it's over. If there's one message that you take away today, I want you to take away this one. Grief doesn't mean your grief doesn't move neatly. You may feel okay one day and overwhelmed the next. That doesn't mean you're going backwards. I often describe grief as waves. Over time, they change, but they still come. In early grief, it could be like the waves are crashing down. And others, over time, it's just this gentle, like the tide is coming in and it goes out again. I'll share an example. My brother died more than 15 years ago, and there are still moments when grief catches me unexpectedly. Sometimes it's something small, hearing a song, reaching a milestone, seeing other siblings together, or wishing I could pick up the phone and tell him something. Most days, I don't experience grief in the same intense way I once did, but there are moments where I still miss him deeply. What I've learned is that those moments don't mean I'm grieving incorrectly or that I haven't healed. They remind me that my love and grief continue to coexist. Grief changes over time, but connection and love remains. What this means is that there's no right order, no stage you can reach. Grief is unpredictable, and learning to move through it rather than against it is part of the journey. Why does grief feel lonely? Grief can feel incredibly isolating. The world often moves on faster than our hearts do. Those around you may return to routine life sooner than you are ready. This can be especially difficult in workplaces. Bereavement leave often ends long before grief does. People may expect you to return to your usual pace and productivity while you're still carrying enormous emotional and physical demands. Sometimes grief becomes invisible at work because people feel pressured to appear okay. I know I felt that way. That invisibility can deepen feelings of isolation. And I know questions like this, and people don't mean to be hurtful, but sometimes they come across that way. And I do remember after my brother died, people saying, "Were you close?" Or, pressure to sort of get back to normal can leave you feeling unseen and misunderstood. Some grief is also disenfranchised. Examples of disenfranchised grief could include pet loss, sibling loss, or friend loss, or an estranged relationship, or losses others don't understand. When grief isn't recognized, people feel invisible. Being witnessed matters. So, yeah, what actually helps? Support doesn't remove grief, it helps carry it. And I really love the analogy that I've used before is that, that support helps you learn to carry what you cannot put down. So, three gentle supports: connection, meeting with someone who understands grief, or join a group; rest and movement. Sleep is important, but movement also helps move grief through your body. If you're interested in grief yoga, you don't have to do pretzel work. It's just called grief yoga. Check out Paul Denniston. He does great work in this area. The other is ritual and meaning. Some of the things I've done to create meaning is this work I'm doing now. Or rituals like visiting a location meaningful to you and the person you're grieving. It doesn't have to be big. Also notice often what doesn't help. So comparison, we often say, well, loss of a child is worse than the loss of a parent. And I always say to people, the greatest loss is your loss that you're experiencing. Trying to fix statements like everything happens for a reason. I'm sure, I even heard that one, many times. Or the one I've heard about my cat is that, he lived a long life and it was time to say goodbye. For me, I wish he could have lived forever. Those kind of things can be very hurtful when someone is grieving a loved one and rushing that healing. If you're wondering what makes a difference, presence matters more than perfect words. So just sitting with someone who's had a loss is very powerful. Continuing bonds. This slide often surprises people. Many of us were taught we need to let go. Well, but there's great research telling us something completely different. So back in the 1980s, researchers Dennis Klaas, Phyllis Silverman, and Stephen Nickman helped shift our understanding of grief through their work on what became known as continuing bonds. Their research showed that maintaining an ongoing connection with someone who has died is not unusual, and it's not a sign of being stuck in grief. Instead, they found that continuing bonds are a common and healthy response to loss. Healthy grieving often includes staying connected. That may look like telling stories. Just a little, personal anecdote. It's so interesting when one of my brother's friends has a New Year's Eve party every year. And since my brother died, they invite me there every year. And every year, the guys go downstairs. The girls, it's so traditional. The girls are upstairs, but sometimes I sneak downstairs with the guys. And they always tell me little stories about my brother that I wouldn't have known, right? My brother was older than me. So, they would tell little stories, and it's so interesting, and feels like I'm close to them and close to my brother. Looking through photos, keeping belongings, doing rituals, charitable acts, or talking internally to that person or pet. I know I've had conversations with, my mother or my father. And it's interesting, David Kessler, who's a leading grief specialist, he lost his son 10 years ago to an accidental fentanyl overdose. And he said uh, he still parents his son. He still does the things a parent would do. For some people, it may mean cooking a favorite meal, carrying an object that reminds them of the person or companion animal, celebrating birthdays, or quietly speaking to them in moments that matter. Love doesn't end, the relationship changes. Sometimes what changes is not whether the relationship exists, but how we experience it. What helps you stay connected with the person you've lost? There's 4 easy takeaways that I'd like to give you today. Your grief is not wrong. Each person's grief is a unique as a fingerprint. Grief affects the mind, as we've talked about, and the body. It's interesting the impact of early grief, hearing about my brother's death. And I could say the same for when I heard about my father's death. For my brother, I realized how his death, hearing that he died, affected, because I thought it was completely compus mentis. But he died in Kingston, and I packed uh, a bag quickly because I got a phone call like 1 a.m. And I packed a bag, and I mean literally a bag, like a grocery bag, so that I had something I could go to the hospital where they had kept him until I arrived after his death. And I looked at the bag after we went back to his house, and I looked in my bag, and I'd packed flip-flops and a t-shirt, and it was December. So it just shows you. And I also had difficulty finding the hospital, which I'd been to multiple times before in the past, and I seem to have forgotten how to get there. So that is how grief affects the mind. Connection matters. Small actions count. Do you need to do, you don't need to do everything. And those small little incremental steps will make a difference. You don't have to walk alone. I think this is one of the things that, has made such a difference for myself, is that I found other people that understand grief. If something today resonates with you, consider the next step. That might mean you check out my website or other resources and information. There on my website, there's a whole resource section. If you're like, you like to read stuff, you can go there and check those out. You could join one of my grief cafes, which is just an informal drop in. We just chat for an hour, nothing structured. You could come to another education session, and we provide these education sessions once a month, the last Thursday of the month. You could explore group, or perhaps you're not ready for group, so you can look at one on one support, and I provide that online. Or simply continuing the conversation, talking to other people. But you don't have to do everything today, one little thing at a time. So just take a moment here, a little bit of a reflection activity, and choose one of these sentences as we close out our conversation before taking questions. Choose one sentence. And you can do this in your mind, or you can pop it in the chat box, or you can put your hand up and go ahead and let me know, and you can just unmute yourself and say it out loud. But you could choose one that says, "Today I learned blank. One thing I want to remember blank. And one way I can support myself." I don't know, Gwen, if there's anything in the chat.
Gerardo, you look like you were going to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. Today I learned that it's okay to continue to grieve, even though I lost my dad 8 years ago, and I still miss him. And that grief is like waves that come and go. I thought that was very poignant because it truly is. Like I thought I was, not done grieving, because obviously I don't think we ever are done, but I thought I was on this sort of a straight and narrow, and then my car broke down, and this was the car that I used to drive my dad to all his medical appointments and then to chemo and it just flooded back like it was last week. And so I'm trying to negotiate with my husband to, spare no expenses, of course, in a reasonable sense, and fix that car, because like we used to sing Polish songs and, cry and laugh, and he never saw the house we moved to after the kids left home for university. So the car was like our place, my dad and mine. So thank you. I really appreciate going through this, and I think this would be really helpful. I mean, I know we're talking directly right now, but I think one of the teams that I support is a palliative team. I think it would be awesome if we could invite you to our team meeting, and if you could share this, because they support people of all walks of life, and this would be so helpful for them to hear as they can sort of elevate their conversations about grief with patients and their relatives, and even with each other. I mean, I love some of the statements you made about how I think one thing it also dawned on me, and you might have said it or I might have just thought about it, that a person who has not grieved does not understand grief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not something that can be taught.
No.
It's something that you experience, and of course everyone experiences it uniquely and through their own lens and whatever their relationship was they had. So I'm deeply sorry about your loss of RP. No matter how old RP was, it was too soon. I had my Daryl left. Sorry.
It's okay.
On the Rainbow Bridge a couple of years ago, and I still miss him, and I still have his bowl, and I sometimes still expect him to walk into the room, so it's doesn't go away. I think his spirit is still in the house.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know Gwen and I talk about this quite a bit, having each owned a number of animal companions that you definitely feel that loss, and you sometimes sense that they're there, right? That,
Hmm.
Abby, my dog, and I, sometimes we hear RP jumping off the bed. Like it sounds like that to us, and we both look. So if the dog is hearing, I think to myself, okay, I'm not imagining, that I'm hearing RP jump off the bed. And that's so interesting because you might find it if you're able to come to the presentation on, you know, Mary Frances O'Connor, who talks why the brain does that, why after loss, is our brain trying to make sense of grief, right, of the loss, and so all that is very true, for sure. Thank you for sharing that, Dorota. Yeah, you don't
Thank
get
you.
out of this life without experiencing grief. Some of us, uh, in my own experience, I think, you know, how come I'm the last one? My family's gone. And I think because my work is not done yet. And, I think, how would my brother have coped with the loss of my parents, right? If I'd been gone. And I think I feel like I spared him that, despite being such a tough guy, he was very emotional. And I think it would have been tough to watch my parent die. So thank you for spending time together. And, grief asks a lot of us, and showing up is meaningful. And if I leave you with one message today, let it be this: that there's no perfect way to grieve. Your experience matters, and you do not have to carry it alone. Thank you. You'll see there that I have believe it or not, I have business socials. I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram, and I post there every day, also on LinkedIn. So feel free to follow me there for more information and affirmations and just experiencing grief together. And, just acknowledging the work that Gwen has put into this, how we work together after all these years, is I go, Gwen, I'm thinking of this. I'd like to talk about this. Can you find the literature that supports? Where did I hear that? Please, find that. And she writes this amazing stuff, and then I can speak to the presentation. So, um, I'm so grateful for that. And so if you like some of these references, and I did talk about some of the books and about David Kessler, and feel free to do that. So I'm just going to stop sharing. And if there, if you, of course, I'd love, Dorota, to come and see your team. Maybe some of the people I may still know, may still be working there. But yes, I'm happy to have those conversations, because one of the areas that Gwen and I had also talked about is, how, from a professional point of view, and Gwen has been a PPSMC, but how does cumulative grief affect us in the workplace? So in
Hmm.
our work we do, as we're all nurses here. I believe you're a nurse, right, Dorota? I'm trying to remember.
Yes,
Yes.
that's right.
So registered nurse, like all that we've seen, people at difficult times in their life. And, that I believe that we absorb that as professionals. Um, and as healthcare leaders, we also absorb the sadness of our staff, either in their
Hmm.
personal life, or watch them as they integrate difficult stories that they deal with, right? So, and that has, and recognizing that in the workplace, I think helps around, workplace wellness, right? Satisfaction in your job and opportunities to debrief. And I have to say, because I'm a nurse myself, that, you know, we grumble about having to debrief, but put us in a setting where we can talk about those things. And it's very cathartic, right? Or even talk about our personal losses, and if those emotions come up, that's okay, right?
Mhm. Oh, no, this
Any,
is very powerful. Thank you so much, Lynn. I think one of the things that makes me think, for us, those that support palliative teams and teams that deliver end of life care, and I think it's really important that we acknowledge that it is an emotional load and we carry it. And yeah, at times we need to unburden. So, giving people an opportunity to just talk about it or even just to listen. They might not even be ready to talk about it, but just to listen and sort of hear and normalize, how they're feeling and sort of helping them realize that, yeah, it affects you on so many levels. It's not just your emotions, but even physically. So, yeah, I would love to maybe set up a time and we also have a palliative care working group, which is kind of a mishmash of people that are just interested in doing death better for our patients in Mississauga Halton. So that they might also be a good audience for you. And I was thinking like, well, when you were speaking, your tone of voice was just so soothing. I was even thinking like we have a palliative um, leading project, the provincial leading project, maybe that group could also benefit from it. We have three hospices actually. We're dealing with three hospices. So Dorothy Lay, Ian Anderson, and Hospice Mississauga. So like it just kept on percolating in my head while you were speaking, all these opportunities to bring this forth to all those people. So if you're open to it, I would definitely want to suggest
always,
getting
always.
you
There's
connected.
no,
Yeah.
there's no sort of, they always say coincidences, right? There's no coincidences. There's no, things are meant to connect. So I love, we can connect through LinkedIn or others.
Sure.
But Gwen, you were going to say something.
I just wanted to share with Dorada. You said it's been 8 years you've been grieving for your father.
Mhm.
My grandmother died over 40 years ago, and
Mm.
I still grieve. So you're right. We live with it. It doesn't stop. It
Mm.
changes. And every once in a while, I get caught.
Hmm.
And uh, it just,
Yeah,
that's part of life.
yeah, for sure. There's, I don't know if you know the actor, and if you ever want to Google this or look for on social media, Billy Bob Thornton.
Mhm.
He talks about the loss of his brother. And one thing that just kind of smacked me in the face when he was being interviewed by Oprah Winfrey. I think she was like like a master class. Remember, she used to have that
Mhm.
where she would interview different people, and I call it a master class. And he was talking about, at any given time he could be, you know, 50% sad and 50% happy at any given moment, right? Melancholy. And he said, if I have to be sad, there are times when I miss my brother and I miss him and who he was. He died quite young at like around in his 20s. And he said, if I have to carry that, then I honor that person. So when you feel that, you're still connected to that person, right? And I thought, wow, that one really stuck. I actually saved that reel. I have it saved in my favorites. So yeah, I think
Thank you.
yeah, for sure. Check it out. Any other questions that you popped into your head, Dorota, that you wanted to ask us before we close out?
I love the list of resources. Thank you so much. I'll definitely visit your website. You wrote lynnmuirgrief.ca, so I wrote it down. I think it's one of those things we don't do well. I think it's one of those taboo things that, because it's not happy and joyful, it's not part of our sort of mentality, Western mentality, because everything has to be up and up and this is not up and up. This is kind of down but it's okay. Um, there were a few things you spoke about, like, some people after the loss, they throw themselves in this sort of whirlwind of activities. Yeah, I mean, totally. People go into this fever of engagements. I mean, all of a sudden, you're learning piano and you're painting watercolors and you're, I don't know, 58 other things. But then that's okay, because once things sort of settle down, you can sort of, you have some things to go back on
Yeah,
and regroup and figure yourself out, because you're a different person after a loss.
100%. Yeah, you can never go back to the before times, I call it, right?
Hmm.
There's a before the
Yep.
loss and there's after the loss. But one of the things, another resource I really love is Anderson Cooper. And if you've ever from CNN, and we see him as this correspondent and the very famous uh, news anchor. And, he lost his father at 10 years old and his brother to suicide at around 21. And then, his mother was Gloria Vanderbilt, who comes from a very wealthy family in the United States, a very well-known family. And, her death in her 90s. But he said, when his father and his brother died, he threw himself into work. He went to every dangerous correspondence, war or anything. Like, he did that for 30 years. And he said, and then when he turned 50 and he had his own kids, or, he has two sons, he said it kind of hit him then that he hadn't grieved. So if you
Hmm.
watch his podcast called All There Is, it's an amazing podcast. I mean, you can watch podcasts. I find it funny that you can watch podcasts that, you can either listen to it on any platform, but you can also watch it. He's on YouTube and he interviews people, but he also talks about how he's just now, processing the grief of his
Hmm.
father and his brother. And he also, I mean, he interviews, well-known people, not necessarily actors, but well-known people. And he also talks to sort of the average person. They call in and they talk about, their grief and what has helped them. So it's this community of sharing that says, whatever way you're grieving, it's okay. And some
Hmm.
of the things, you listen and you're going, oh, yeah, that I do that. And I thought I was crazy, like when you mentioned about having your dog's dish, I still have our peas
Cat. It
dishes.
was a
Oh,
cat.
sorry, cat. Sorry, my apologies.
Well,
Cat,
Daryl was a cat. Yes.
Daryl, Daryl and his other brother, Daryl. You would understand that.
Yes, exactly. That's why. Yeah, that's his other brother there.
It's an old show, but so I still have his dish. And I say to people, you don't have to get rid of those belongings. If it's not hurting anybody, it's not affecting your day-to-day life,
Oh.
that's okay. And I still have his dishes. So right when you said that, I had this moment of connection. And Gwen and I have talked about this. She talked to, say, one of her dogs that I think died many, many years ago, right, Gwen? You came across his ball and you'd had for, I don't know, he's been gone, what, 15 years or something, maybe longer. And you came across his ball that you kept.
Yeah. That was the dog Teddy that I had when the kids were little. So it's been like 30, 35 years. And just last summer,
Right?
I found the ball tucked away in a bin of stuff because I was cleaning up. So
Yeah. It's,
yeah.
say you can do what you want. Like, I can't show you what I'm sitting at my desk, but I can't show you that on my desk, and Gwen has seen this before. But I have, memorial cards that you get at funerals, of your loved ones. So I have my mother, my father, my brother, and little figurines. I have my cats, paw prints on cards after he died and his fur. And it's kind of like a shrine, if you want. And only I
Mhm.
see it. So as I'm talking to you, I'm looking at this and it gives me comfort, right? And I say, if it's not interfering with your life,
Right.
you do that, And then I got this, RP's paw is tattoo. So there's
Oh,
all things, yeah, there's all things that you do. I mean, I have other tattoos now since we've worked together. I have a number of tattoos, Dorota. It's all for me and it's all in memory of my family, right? And they have meaning to
mhm.
me. And so, yeah, all those things are important. And it's like it works for you, works for you. Yeah, it's okay.
That's right. That's right.
I just before we sign off, I wanted to also add something. So Dorada, you talked and Lynn, you also talked about how people get busy, busy, busy right after a death, and they're like that's kind of how they're coping is by not dealing with what's been happening.
Mhm.
There's also a little bit of a flip side, is that in today's society, when someone dies, you spend the first 6 months to a year so busy just taking care of the paperwork, the legalese, the whatever,
Mhm.
whatever, whatever. And then when that all calms down is when it often hits people
Mhm.
that there's been a change, if you will, in their world. The other thing that can often catch people is an example. You have to do the taxes. So the year
Mm,
after the
Mhm.
dies, you have to do their taxes. And a lot of times people are sort of taken by surprise when the
mhm.
notice shows up in the mail or they get an email and it kind of triggers things again. So it's one of the things that I used to like to share with health professionals because we don't always see that or think about it because our connection to the person, the family ends with the death because I mean, we don't typically do grief and bereavement care and support. In some of my roles, I did, which is how I really became aware of a lot of this because that's the kind of work I was doing with those individuals, was
Yeah,
helping them through those sudden reminders or the fact that it's been a year. Why am I still feeling the way I do? Those kinds of
Mhm.
things.
yeah, for
Just
sure. Yeah, one of the things that, again from uh, David Kessler, he says, that the average, when they look at statistics, the average time that people start to reach out for grief support is 5 years after the death of a loved one. So, it's usually where early grief is really that first 2 years, and then people sort of move into their grief maturing, right? But yeah, so usually people start to reach out, like to Gwen's point, sometimes a year or two after the loss. So anyway, just looking at the time, thank you so much for
Thank
having
you.
this conversation. I'm just gonna stop record.